the whole contract with employees changed. It used to be like, my dad would get a new car every 2 years because he was a traveling salesman and everything was taken care of. Literally retired a multimillionaire and never made probably more than like $50,000 or $60,000 a year because of his stock options. They really took care of my dad. And when the contract changed in the 80s, when I hear baby boomers say these kids today, they just, they're shiftless, they don't take responsibility, they're not loyal. It's like, what are you giving them to be loyal about? You're giving them nothing. They don't get benefits, they don't get this, they don't get that. Equity, right? So what are you talking about, man? So the contract changed, so the attitude of the worker changed, and it became about them. So we did that, we made that, we created that.
This episode is brought to you by Restaurant Systems Pro. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, founder of 1 Degree Coaching, Ed Doherty. My man, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I feel great.
Dude, I'm excited to have you here. Your friends in Philadelphia told me I need to get in touch. And they were both, Greg and I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden.
Al.
This is so embarrassing. Greg and Al had amazing things to say about the work you did with them and how you helped them scale their business. They were both amazing guests. So if they're going to you for advice, I don't even know. Like they were so impressive. They know their stuff. So this is going to be an amazing episode. I cannot wait to dive into it. Let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote and mantra. What do you got for us?
Well, I love happiness is good business. That's what I'm about. I'm about building great, happy workplaces where people can work in a wonderful, creative, cohesive way.
I love that. And it kind of reminds me of a sentiment I like to echo, that doing good is good business. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. It's funny because when I started this podcast, I was like, I'm going to crack the codes. And go ahead.
That's it. It's the patterns that I saw throughout my career and the codes. That's really where I'm coming from. Crack the code.
Well, it's funny because they're not secrets. These are the things they teach you in first grade.
Yeah.
Like don't hit anybody,
right.
Be nice to other people. Just like the things that we're like the most basic things we're taught are the secrets to this industry.
They are.
But
they're counterintuitive.
Why is that?
We're built the way that our minds are built, the way we are built as humans. What we do naturally is not always what's best. We're still pretty tribal, primitive creatures, and our lesser angels are not always the best way to get people to work together well.
So when I hear you say that, what goes to my mind is our anxieties and the frontal lobe kicking in, telling us that we need to be fearful of certain things. It's like our strength and our weakness is this frontal lobe, because we make things up. We develop fears. Was that where you're referencing?
Exactly. Yeah, our limbic brain drives all of our behaviors, but it has no capacity for language, and it also is extremely it's great at defense. It's not great at connection. So it's something you have to learn. It's a technique, and so leadership really is not a natural thing. There's no natural born leaders, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this is probably something we're going to tap into, because you did say you wanted to talk about enlightened leadership, and I feel like we're kind of getting into that right now.
Already.
So this is a teaser. We're going to be
That's right.
diving deeper into that as the interview evolves. But where does it make sense to start sharing your story? 30 years in the industry. Take me to the beginning.
Lost soul, needing purpose, and found belonging in the restaurant business. Started out as a dishwasher, did it for beer money, in high school, and I remember the last day of my not so great job as a terrible line cook at a average restaurant in a mall, taking off my apron, dropping it into the bin as I went off to college, and saying I'll never work at another effing restaurant as long as I live. And 40 years later, here I am.
That's awesome. So where you were a lost soul. Was this so you went to school, went to college? What did you go to school for?
Well, basically was a ne'er-do-well high school kid during the 70s. I graduated in high school in 1974 and really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I actually flunked out of high school, spent my senior year of summer in summer school when everybody else was having fun, and went to a 2-year school that specialize in highly motivated underachievers, basically losers. And I found my kind of a leadership path there, and I don't want to delve into that too much, but I always worked in restaurants. I continued to work in restaurants. I did well enough at this small school to go to the University of Delaware, and I said, well, I'll be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. It never resonated with me. Continued to work in restaurants, and I worked at the Faculty Alumni Club for the University of Delaware, the Blue and Gold Club, and I worked with this chef. His name was Bill, and he went to this place called the CIA, and it was when it was in Connecticut. It's not the great CIA you know of now. It was like way back when. This guy was drunk, and I'm plowing away doing my student teaching in Wilmington, which in a poor section of Wilmington, and here's this chef showing up for work, getting drunk, and I walked up to him one day and I said, "Hey, Bill, can I ask you a personal question? Because I just got an offer to be a teacher in Wilmington School District for like $14,000 a year. We're talking 1978." And he's like, "Yeah, what's up?" And I was like, "Hey, man, like you come in here every day, you start drinking, and you pass out in the Rathskeller. What do you make a year?" And he was like, "I make $30,000 a year." And I was like, "Damn, I want to do that." And that's literally how I got into the restaurant business.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, and it's definitely a pattern that I picked up on, that people who do really well in this industry tend to not do well in school or like other verticals.
Right.
What do you think is going on there?
I had undiagnosed ADHD, but back in the day, they just called it bad. So
Yeah.
I was always a bad kid. I was, you're talking about the 1950s and 60s, right? So I'm 67 years old. I'm not a spring chicken, but I was this child who had great optimism. I had a zest for life, and I just kept telling me in the system that I was stupid.
Right.
And I'm far from it, obviously, but I created a narrative for myself that I just wasn't good enough, and I was dumb, and I didn't see a path forward. So I just started to act out and got involved in bad behaviors, and the 70s, right?
Right.
And so I found a pirate ship called the restaurant business, where I could be a captain and a swashbuckler. And when I read Bourdain's original book, I was like, that's exactly, I'm the pirate too. And so yeah, it's there's a lot of us pirates.
Well, that resonates with me. I mean, I'm the same story. I came up through the 90s and into the early 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
so the school system had kind of opened up their eyes a little bit and realized, oh, there's different learning styles. But still, I remember when I was a kid, like they would put you into like a group and they would say, hey, like all the dummies get up and walk out.
Bingo. That was me.
It gives you such a complex as a young person. I think the school system had the right intentions, right? But as a kid, you're just like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
So like me, I'm ADHD, colorblind, and dyslexic.
Yeah,
you know?
Me too.
And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of people who are like you and I who would gravitate to this industry for some reason. But when we get here, we excel. I don't know if you know or if you've done any research. Is there a correlation between social and emotional intelligence and people who tend to have ADHD and dyslexia? Like, are we giving up some like intelligence to gain other intelligence? Like, that's kind of how the mind works usually. Like, it always bounces out. Like you're saying yes. Where is this?
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Is there data that supports this?
Yeah, well, you know Simon Sinek, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So some people think he's great, some people don't. I think he's a codifier, and I was listening to a talk he did recently, and he
What's
was
a
saying,
codifier?
A codifier.
What is that?
Somebody sees patterns.
I think I'm a codifier, man.
Yeah. They see patterns, and I'm a codifier. So I help companies write their cultural codification. That's one of the things I do for organizations. I did it with Defined, with Al and Greg. And so I can see patterns in things, and he said that he did research, and again, I haven't delved into it, so that people with ADHD and these other disabilities tend to have this ability to see patterns. They learn how to group things together. They want to diagnose and group things together because the world's scattered for them. So they're always trying to say, let's put this in a pile, let's put this in a pile, and then what's these common things that kind of pull this whole mess together. And so I'm definitely capable of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the way listening to you, what's going through my mind is I always say I'm a big picture person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I see the big picture
Right.
as clear as day. But when it comes down to like getting into the mud,
Mm-hmm.
the details, I'm not.
Right.
I've never been good at that
Yeah.
stuff. Like I get lost in the details.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this later, but that's PI.
Okay.
PI actually looks at these 4 different factors, and I'm a maverick in PI language, and that's a out of the box, big picture thinker who has an innovative approach, this real sense of optimism, but they never give up. And I'm like,
So Simon
that's
Sinek
me.
would call you a Y guy.
I'm a Y guy. Yeah. I'm definitely a Y guy. Yeah. And so in my journey culinarily, here I was a sous chef in this faculty alumni club, and it was absolute garbage, by the way. And there was no online research. I used to go get, I had 3 books. I had La Technique, I had La Méthode, and I had Julia Child's The Art of French Cooking. And I would just use these books to kind of figure stuff out, because you couldn't go online and watch a YouTube video, right? It didn't exist. And what I found out is that I wasn't that good, but I had this like leadership quality, and it was basically optimism. It was basically, I was this energy that would come into a space, and I would find people I could work with that would coalesce around this idea of what turned out to be belonging. And because I was, a little background about, my why and how my why evolved. My mom and dad were great people, and they were lovely, but they had me when they were 36, and I had a brother and sister, and they were adopted, and we had this really weird kind of clan, and there wasn't a lot of safety and belonging at my house. So I would spend an inordinate amount of time out in the street, because back in the day they just let you run around.
I was born in the wrong decade.
Yeah, I mean,
actually, the 90s weren't so bad, but now if I was a kid, oh my god.
Well, the parents would get arrested.
You got a chip on you practically.
Yeah. I mean, we were just, I can't believe how much freedom I had.
Right.
So I was out in the street, and again, I wasn't in the wilds of, I wasn't in a hood per se, but I was in a nice neighborhood, but I created these groups, and I was always in charge because I didn't have safety and belonging at home. I had an older brother who had some issues. He was very violent, and it caused me just to go out and create that family group in the street. So I'm this little guy, right? All of 105 pounds, and I have these big guys around me, and they're listening to me. So I realized that there was this energy and this way of connecting with people that they would give you permission to be their boss. And I learned that very, very early, like as a child. And that became my leadership style later.
Interesting. So thank you for getting into that. You're in your timeline, you're talking to this guy. He's getting drunk every day. He's on the couch. You find out he's making $30,000, which in the 80s, this is the 80s now, 70s?
1979.
70s, early 80s. That's good money. That's probably what, the equivalent to like 60,000 today?
Yeah, maybe more, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you say, this is for me. This is the pirate ship I want to be on. This was kind of a tipping point for you because you were lost up to this point.
This was it.
Yeah.
I told my mother, I went home and told my mother that I was going to be a chef, and she cried. Because there was no, Food Network where you go like, oh, Bobby Flay,
Right.
It was just like, oh, she imagined this guy like in a diner, the greasy spoon chef, right? Like, what a loser. And my parents, aspired to better things. They were folks that came out of the Depression, out of World War II, and they were hoping for this traditional path for their son. And, I was the only one born to the family. My brother and sister adopted. So, there was that. And I just totally disappointed them time and time and time again. And this was the final insult. And I just remember my mom just bawling her eyes out. Wait, what do we mean, chef? What's a chef? Later on, he figured it out. So yeah, I worked at the Faculty Alumni Club. And then I got this opportunity after I told my mom and dad that I would not be going on to be a teacher, although I am one now still, that I got this job at this little cafe in Newark, Delaware that turned out to be just a runaway smash that I just happened to step into. And that was the next part of my career.
So you also said something too, that you would never become a teacher, but what like in their eyes, right? The best restaurateurs are the best teachers.
Oh yeah.
And that's the thing. It's not about them. It's about everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm sure that'll probably come out in your story too. So you found this cafe in Delaware. Well, why was this so impactful?
It was called Goodfellas, and it was a husband and wife. And remember, this is restaurant renaissance. Everybody's faking restaurant. Like there's no blueprint, right? So like in the restaurants in Philadelphia and everywhere at that time, there were doctors and lawyers and teachers and people who were in different disciplines that were getting into the restaurant business, and there was no clue.
Yeah.
And so everybody's in there just winging it, right? And so I was winging it, they were winging it, and this lovely couple, she had hired a chef, and he was the front of the house, and he self-taught, sommelier, loosely, and she's in the back of the house. She had a vision. She was an English, she had a degree in English. And one day the chef just walks out. And it's small. I mean, it was like 45 seats. And then she's just forced to cook, right? So she jumps on. It turns out she's freaking awesome. And by the time I wandered in there was a buzz going on that this woman, who was a female chef, by the way, 1980 right now, this woman is actually got some chops. She's got something. So he's running in the front of the house and they're doing a really amazing job. And it was fine dining in its 80s kind of way. She's in the back of the house. She needs somebody. She puts an ad in the local paper. I'm looking at one ad because I wanted to get out of the faculty alumni club. And she's from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and so am I. She saw on my resume that I was from Cherry Hill, and that's why she asked me to come in, because we were from the same neighborhood, in Delaware. I was in New Jersey, Cherry Hill, right? So I go in there, and it's one of those classic, Garland ranges, had the flat top with the broiler under it, and this 6 burners, and 2 little convection ovens down below, and that was it. That was the entire kitchen. I was just putting on garnish. My job was to make the bread, come up with a vegetable, and then garnish the plates. And she would do all of the cooking, and it would go out, and I would make sure everything was good and wipe the plates. And then one day, this guy named George Perrier shows up. George Perrier from Philadelphia. He was.
I don't actually.
Yeah, well, George, it was the chef in Philadelphia, and went on to be one of the top chefs in the world. He heard about her. He came down. He started eating. And then these 2 other guys show up, Craig Claiborne, who was the New York Times food critic, and Pierre Franet, who was the 60-Minute Gourmet, which was his partner at the New York Times. And these luminaries who in the day were, the chef gods of the day, started showing up. And there was a buzz around her. And she was the first female chef that was in the top 10 food and wine, top 10 chef thing. And I'm standing next to her. And I just, by absolute coincidence, I got swept up in this whole amazing journey for her. And then I became delusional. I thought I was talented. And I was not. And so
did this come back to bite you at some point?
Yeah, because I was basically putting parsley on the plate, and I was like, "Look at me! I'm hanging out with Pierre Franet, going out to dinner with George Perrier." And there's actually a movie about George called King George.
I think now that you say it, there's so many names out there; it's hard to keep track. Especially the French names all kind of sound the same to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So eventually, I went on to Philadelphia, and then I found out just that I didn't have anything, so that was.
But you got something, man, because here you are today, and I think you hadn't at this point in your journey, you haven't found out what your it factor is yet.
Right.
Would you consider yourself a talented chef today, or when did you realize that you weren't a talented chef?
All the time.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Yeah.
I was painfully aware that I was mediocre, and that I had to build. I had an overarching vision of what everything could be, because I'm like you, the ADHD, the ADHD guys. They have that big picture view of the world. I had the dream, and I had to learn how to create the components. I had to say, what is what are the parts in this that I can't do?
So at this point in your journey in Delaware at the cafe, you have a dream. Is the dream, is this the same theme, the same dream throughout your career, or did you pivot? What was the dream?
The dream was that I would be a famous chef.
So that's not what happened.
In a burgeoning, no. I was regionally known,
Okay.
in Philadelphia in the 1980s and 90s. And I did some things that were pretty cool. But I wanted to be like a star.
Yeah.
And, I in high school, I had worked in summer stock theater. And so I had this like little bit of theater in me. And, so I had that going on. I was a theater minor at the University of Delaware. And I was a little, little delusional. So when I decided to go to Philadelphia and, go to the big city, right, and become, the next great chef, knowing in the back of my head that I guess that I didn't know much. But at this point, I was, to use the word again, I was pretty delusional. And I went and I interviewed at this place called La Terrasse. And anybody who knows La Terrasse, Ellen Yin, by the way, that we were.
She worked there.
She worked there.
Yep.
I missed her by a few months. I was there before her. I went in there, interviewed by Judy Wicks, who opened up the White Dog Cafe, and Judy was the manager. It was the oyster bed of just like everybody, right? Came out of there. So many amazing restaurants were born out of that institution. It was at the University of Pennsylvania campus. It had been around since the 1960s, and it had morphed into just this amazing place. And in Philadelphia at the time, in 1981, when I went up there were a handful of restaurants. Steven Starr wasn't in the scene yet.
What was the year you just said? 1980?
81. Yeah. So this group of people that were in this restaurant were extraordinary. But the bottom line is I was interviewed. I really believed that I could cook. And I went into this French restaurant, and I learned like within moments that I was way in over my head.
So we have 42 years to cover at this point in your journey, right? Because it's still 1981. Just doing a little bit of research this morning, I saw that your first, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first business you were an owner in was the Capital Grille.
Managing partner.
Mm-hmm. What was the evolution? Like, what were between this point in 1981, 19 years,
right?
Where were the key evolution, or where were the tipping points for you as a professional?
Great. Yeah, we'll pop around. So the key was at La Terrasse, I realized that I couldn't cook, right? So I had this spirit and energy, as I said before, that was contagious, and you couldn't get away with what I did. I mean, again, I had my cookbooks. I'd run to the locker, and look stuff up. When the chef was like, "Make us some hollandaise," I was like, "The what?" And so I was able to fake it till I made it, and within 2.5 years, I became the executive chef at La Terrasse.
Wow.
And I still was not that good, but I was able to build teams. And then I just went to the White Dog with Judy and helped her get started. Which went on to be an institution in Philadelphia. And then I just kept popping, I'd spend like 3 or 4 years at different series of restaurants. Ended up at La Campagna in the 90s. And that was the top, the peak of my culinary reputation. But at the end of the day, I just kept getting this calling to be a leader more than a chef. That I started to see that there was this thing inside of me that wanted to build different types of workplaces than the traditional ones we were in.
What do you mean by different? How did you want it to be different?
Well, first, I mean, if we're going to get personal, I'm a reformed a-hole. I mean, I was, people tell me I was great, but I know I wasn't. I was not overly nice. I took, I went to Paris and studied there for a while, and I really learned from Michelin chefs how to be
an asshole.
Yeah. Can I say that? Yeah.
You can say far worse. I mean, let's be honest. We're talking to restaurant owners.
Right. So I'm a reformed asshole. That's what I call myself. I had this moment where I was drinking too much and I was partying too much.
What's drinking too much look like? Give me
alcoholism. An example. I couldn't stop drinking. Now, I never drank during the day, but at night, you're a chef in Philadelphia in the 1980s. You can go wherever you want. It's free.
Right.
It's free drugs, right? And it's and I wasn't a big drug guy, but I was.
I mean, alcohol's a drug. Listen, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I think it's weird how society separates alcohol
True.
from drugs. It's a drug.
Yeah, it is.
Not trying to call you a druggie, but I'm just saying.
No, I'm an
Can we
alcoholic.
just be honest? Alcohol's a drug.
It is. Yeah, but so I got really caught up in alcohol, and so in one moment, I looked in the mirror. I had this lovely woman who I was dating. I'd already ruined one marriage. I had a 4-year-old daughter, and that came apart. And I looked in the mirror one day and said, number one, you're drunk, and number two, you're an asshole. And that moment, I even know the date. It was April 20th of 1990. I went on a new path, and the new path was learning how to be a better person, and learning how to be a better leader, how to be a better boyfriend. That woman, by the way, is now my wife, and we have 3 kids. But the bottom line is that I really consciously started a path to enlightenment, and I'm not using that word like I was, became a yogi, but I wanted to be a better man.
How old were you at this point in 91? Not to date you.
Yeah, I was born in 1956.
You're
so
67 now.
I was 32-ish.
It's about the time that a lot of men start to achieve self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And they start going, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of, I feel like, so, I mean, we didn't take similar paths, but I really do resonate with what you're sharing, because I see a lot of myself in you as far as strengths and weaknesses go. And I'm just starting to realize, like, even like through this podcast, talking to successful restaurateurs, like the reason why I started the show was so I could learn how to be a successful restaurateur and then use the money that I generate from the show to open restaurants. And the more I started learning from different people's stories, I'm like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't do this.
Stay behind the mic, my friend.
Yeah. I don't think I'd be a great restaurateur. I don't think I'd be a great chef because I don't have certain skills that are necessary.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, I agree with this. You don't, if you're trying to be everything, you will never be successful. I think that the only way I'm ever going to be a successful restaurateur is by surrounding myself in building teams with people who are super talented.
That's right.
And that's the most successful restaurateur.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's like this, but like, I feel like I see that in you too. So
yeah. So
better leader, better person.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I was told in AA that I couldn't be in the restaurant business anymore. And then luckily somebody tapped me on the shoulder and went, yes, you can. Just don't drink. I was like, okay.
Well,
I was going to go off and
why
cut
did they tell you that, though?
Oh, well, there's a lot of opinions. And, listen, AA really helped me. Not only great codification, by the way. The 12 steps are big part of how I figured out the 1 degree methodology that I use to teach leaders. It was interesting, right? You take these people who are like on the verge of killing themselves to them being these enlightened individuals, right? If the percentages aren't great. I'm somebody that actually like stopped drinking and never had another drink. The relapses are everywhere. But at the end of the day, I took it really seriously because of my nature and my optimism and all that. And really jumped in like I jump into everything. So when they said you can't be around alcohol, and 1 or 2 people had an opinion and said you can't be around alcohol, it means you can't work in restaurants. You just can't. I was like, yes, sir, I won't. And somebody, thank God.
Well, you kind of remind me of Mickey Bask. I don't know if that name's familiar.
Yeah.
Ben's friends.
Yeah.
So he was on the show. Similar story where he was like he told his story. He was a raging alcoholic on the verge of death. The only calories he consumed was from alcohol. Like he almost died. Bad. Same thing. And he was an amazing host. Like he was a front of house person, right? And they're like, you can't work in the restaurant industry. And he was like, this is all I know. This is what I do.
Yeah.
And the reason is because you can't. They say alcoholism is associated with certain triggers, right? And people,
places, and things.
And that's work. Your work is your trigger. So how do you overcome that?
Well, I'm not a religious person, but this person said just obsessively, he used the word pray, but I took it as differently. And I really did ask the universe that when I was at work to please give me the respite away from this compulsion to drink. And I really did. I really mindfully, worked on when I was flambeing that it was just a tool. It was a knife. It was a cleaver. It was whatever other tool I had there. And I talked myself into that when I was there, that I was safe. And then if I went anywhere else, people, places, and things, as they call it in AA, right? If I walked into a bar, and smelled that stale beer, the alarms would go off and I'd run out. But I was okay in my safe place, which was restaurants.
Well, I'm not a religious person either, but it's funny because you see a lot of parallels in different cultures, whether you're Buddhist or Catholic, meditation, prayer.
I'm a recovering Catholic, yeah.
Yeah, but like what happens when you pray is like you kind of shut your brain off. Mm-hmm. So there might be a trigger to go do something. Mm-hmm. Like you might smell that beer,
yep.
Right? But in your mind is like, oh, next thing is put beer in face. Mm-hmm. But if you stop and you breathe, right, then you reset the mind and you focus on the breath and like it will pass. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's what was happening?
Yeah. I think it's like a mantra thing. You know, we started out with a mantra, and I just kept telling myself that, and it worked. I don't know how, and I never really looked into why. But I found when I was at work that alcohol was not a problem. If I went anywhere else, the alarms would go off. Right. It was just very fascinating.
So 1990 to 2000, you're not an owner of a business yet.
No.
You were executive chefing. You're getting sober. You're realizing, hey, I'm not the most talented chef. However, I have this amazing ability to bring people together, to lead.
Yeah.
Was it before or after the sobriety that started to really take shape?
Well, like I said, I knew that in my childhood, but I never really made it formulaic, And then I once I started getting sober, the first thing I did is I read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh my God, awesome book.
So I was like, oh, human nature is a thing, right? So I tell people, you want to be a leader? Basically, there's a handful of things that I would suggest. Well, first you got to like people, because if you don't, then if it's all about you, like you said earlier, people know that they're not going to follow you. You got to be a student of human nature, man. You got to learn how people tick, how you tick, and then you got to take 100% responsibility for your own shit, right? So that's my basic model for leadership. I have a few other things that I've sprinkled on there, but yeah, I mean, I realized, you're talking from that 90 to 2000, it stopped being about the food, and it started being about how can I get human beings to work together well. And it goes back to my origin story that I did not have safety and belonging at home. The restaurant business is full of, drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And people don't get along. I realized I was spending an inordinate amount of time grinding the gears with this human being stuff. And I was like, how can we eliminate the noise and the static so we can get down to doing cool shit together? I wanted to do cool shit. That's what I wanted to do. So I had this big vision of being awesome, like a team of people doing freaking awesome stuff.
What is cool shit? I'm just curious. Like in your mind, what was cool shit?
So this last week, your friends and mine, the folks from Defined,
Al and Greg.
Yeah, one of their partners won a James Beard Award.
Right, and she was referred. She's behind the. What's her name again? Remind me.
Her name is Knock, and I'm not going to butcher her last name.
The Thai
goes
concept
by Knock.
that just
She's
recently,
Thai, yeah, Kalia.
Oh my God, we got to eat there. Greg, thank you so much for taking us out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this, I do leadership coaching for them, and I do this monthly all team management coaching where we talk about a subject. Then I had this advanced class I do with them. And so Wednesday, they were just back from James Beard. And I was like, anything happening interesting this week? And the energy, right? Like you could just feel like that pride. Doing amazing shit together is like we grind. And every once in a while, something happens, right? Where you James Beard Award, or you get this, or you get that, or you get a nice review. But when you realize that you're just freaking awesome, when you put a bunch of people together who see the big picture, they understand it, they're purpose-driven, they have mastery in what they do, and they're self-directed, which is the three components of happiness at work, you get magic. And that drug, that magic, when people get together and they're awesome together, that's that's to me everything in the workplace.
Hit me with those 3 components one more time.
It's purpose, so work has meaning beyond the paycheck. Mastery, like really being good. And then autonomy, which is to be self-directed and actually have independence because you're so freaking good.
Is that from Daniel Pink's book?
That's right.
Yeah, I thought that.
Yeah,
was
Drive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So he's another one of my thought leaders that I follow. And that, by the way, was a study done over decades, right? By basically the U.S. government. Pretty crazy, but and it didn't make any sense, right? What's this purpose stuff? Now we're in this new era where it's all about that. But anyway, when we as I worked from chef, and then I realized, I had 4 children. I was never home, and I was trying to get a better quality of life for myself. So I started to put together this plan that I got to get out of the whites, because I would see these 60-year-old chefs, and I'd be like, dude, I do not want to be that dude.
How do you think their body felt at 60 years old doing that?
I can't imagine now at my age, but I would see this one guy I saw, he had these bags on his leg. They were like air bags, like holding in his varicose veins, and I was like, not pretty. So I started devising this plan of like, how do I get out of the kitchen and move to the front of the house? So I left La Campagna, which was my last full-time chef job. Got to cook at the Beard House in 1996. That was fun. There was talk about nomination, which didn't happen for me, but I got a gig at this place. It was a brand new restaurant, and they said, you're going to be the GM and you're going to be the chef. So I opened up this restaurant, and it was an Italian concept, and that's when I really started to like bear down on the whole leadership thing. That's when it really started to take off for me.
I think now is a great time to take our first break to thank our sponsors, and we'll be right back to talk about how things started to change.
Thank you.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now, Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We're back, and where we left off in your career, you kind of had this aha moment of like, hey, like I don't want to be in my 60s compression tights on my legs.
Right.
If I'm gonna make it in this career, I need to transition to become a leader and take it from there. And when we go forward, like what was like the next transitional or pivotal tipping point for you? Like, how did you get to that point? Like, what was going on?
Well, I was working at this restaurant I opened up, and it was a pretty big success. And I was this hybrid GM and chef. And there was the Houlihan's Corporation, for some unknown reason, I don't even remember why, approached me about helping them open up a seafood concept in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. And I'm like, Houlihan's? I don't work for, like to work for the man, corporations, like, forget it. That's soulless, cesspool. I'm not going there, right? Chain restaurants. And then they told me how much they'd be paying me. And I had, 4 young children. So
was it more than 30,000?
Yeah, definitely more than 30,000. I definitely broke through a ceiling there, and I became, they were petrified because it was a Fridays before. It was it was a Houlihan's. Excuse me. And they were opening up these concepts called Devon, and they were really nice. I actually copied the design of the Oyster Bar in New York City. And they were really doing elevated seafood. It was actually really good. And they wanted to take my reputation and kind of say, well, Ed's kind of the owner here. And they were trying to hide
that now.
Yeah, well, I was like, that's really dumb, and especially when
equity, if you want to call me the owner, right?
That's right. Yeah. And there was an article that came out in one of the trade papers, like Doherty and Company, and I was like, each. And then the critic Craig Laban found out that I wasn't, and it didn't work out well a little bit until we kind of figured it out. But anyway, it was there. I realized that there were all these systems that I was totally unaware of, like labor control, P&Ls.
This is the 90s.
Yeah, this is 1999.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is when the secrets start becoming available to the masses. But even at this point, I feel like you needed money and access to consultants, the people the key holders.
Yes.
You know, this stuff wasn't like, I'm thinking of my parents right now when they opened their restaurant, kind of like you were talking about, people were just winging it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what are they charging down the street?
Yeah.
Okay, let's charge.
That's
$1
the market
less.
study they did. Yeah.
And this is where we start thinking like menu engineering,
right?
Margins, like math.
Yes.
Take it from there.
Yeah, and they actually had culture there, believe it or not. It was pretty cool. The Houlihan's was trying to do a transition. They brought in Dan Scoggin, who was the inventor of Fridays, right? And they actually had a culture codification. They had this set of values, and they had this like mission statement, and then they had some amazing like labor controls and production sheets, and I'm like, whoa! And I felt like I was like a kid in a candy store. And so I just really just bathed in that and really just loved it. And about a year and a half later, I built the sales up, and I really wasn't paying attention to sales. I was never like top line driven, nor was I bottom line driven. I was always culture driven. I didn't know that. You know, just really quick to go back. Culture is a big part of every organization, right? And I didn't. No one now. Everybody talks about culture like, you know, it's like water. But you know, back in 1980, when I met Judy Wicks taught me culture, because she built a culture inside La Terrace that made everybody awesome. You know, doing awesome things. We had this high level of pride. She was dismissed one day, and I watched the entire organization crash within a matter of weeks. Weeks. She was the culture, right? Yeah. So, and we didn't talk about culture back then. So, anyway, I started looking at this cultural codification, these systems. I was like, wow, if we could take the heart and soul of a mom pa, like that great chef who has no discipline, it's all about him, and we could take some of these systems, and then we could say to the chef, the owners, what do you care about? Where do you want to be when you grow up? Where are we going? What do you value? And then how can we find a bunch of true believers who can do that with you? Not people working for the paycheck, true believers. So that was really kind of the tipping point. So after about a year and a half at Devon's Seafood Grill, like killing it, you know, with sales, just having fun building a team and kind of working on this whole mechanism that I was trying to figure out how I could take this to the masses, right? The Capital Grille came knocking. They noticed this busy place in Rittenhouse Square, and they called me up. I didn't know who they were. They were a steakhouse chain out of Providence, Rhode Island, and then Atlanta.
Started in 1990, so they were like 10 years in at this point.
That's right.
How many locations did they have?
They had 11, and one had failed in San Francisco. So they were kind of like hurting right now.
Ironically, it's always the one that's way the hell off.
Right.
That doesn't do well.
That's right. And they learned a lot from that. Yeah. So turns out these guys were coming in and watching me run shifts, because I was full blown like front of the house at that point. And they were like, you know, I mean, they tell me they were like amazed by how I was. One minute I was in the expo, and then the next minute I was like at the host stand, and I was coaching, and then coaching over here and coaching over there. And it was basically, I was a coach, right? So they called me up. I said, I don't know who you guys are. And by the way, I'm making a lot of money, and, you know, so, you know, I'm kind of a big deal. And, and they said, come down to Atlanta. You know, we've merged with another company, and we want you to meet a guy named Gene Lee. And I was like, okay, who's Gene Lee? And he's like, he's our vice president. Gene Lee just retired, by the way, as the CEO of Darden. Oh. So here's this guy. I'm sitting in front of him in Atlanta. They give me 4 hours of testing, psychological, all this stuff, and math. And, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to lose this job. And I sat in front of this, like, really quiet, unassuming, like, wise old owl. And he said, Ed, do you know what we do here at Rare Hospitality? And I was like, I'm assuming we do hospitality, food, wine. You guys are into steaks, right? Yeah. And he was like, no. And he like took my head off. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, yeah, we're not about that. We just happen to be in the restaurant business. And he's the first person who introduced the idea of why to me.
The first idea of why?
Just like, yeah, the codified why, like, no, we just happen to be in the restaurant business. What we're passionate about, what we believe in, what we represent is a company that we're people developers. And I was like, oh, shite, I'm in the right place here. And then they offer.
I crap a lot. Not
No,
so
go
much
ahead.
anymore. I don't crap a lot. Let me finish the sentence.
Well, I hope you're regular.
I crap a lot on corporate and franchises. I
Yeah.
used to a lot more. When I first started this podcast, I was your stereotypical millennial, money's bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the more I learned, the more I educated myself, the more I realized that, you know, these I think that a lot of these big corporations kind of fell into traps doing best practices and putting the bottom line over people at some points. But what I'm realizing is that a lot of the people behind these organizations are really incredible. And like, if you scale something like Darden, right? Like if you're able to scale something like that, like you're doing some stuff, right? And you are creating opportunity. You are absolutely developing people.
Yeah.
So I've opened my mind up a lot to it. I think we can find better balance. But anyway, I don't mean to.
No, that's
cut you
exactly
short
right.
with my
No,
crap stories.
No. The amazing thing is that this guy dropped into my head this thing that I always believed, but I never heard anybody actually say it. Now, we were called Rare Hospitality. It was Bugaboo Creek, which doesn't exist anymore. It was this animatronics, you know, like a Disney with stakes, you know, like a moose talking on the wall. There was Longhorn, right, as we know, which is a massive chain right now. And there was the Capital Grille, and there was a couple other smaller organizations. So Philadelphia Capital Grille, and you know, the corner of Broad and Chestnut, about a block from City Hall, and I couldn't understand why they hired me. Number one, I knew nothing about steakhouses, and I was green as a manager, and you know, these guys had high aspirations, but they kept talking about this connection, you know, like, what if we could create a 1 degree connection
Singularity
throughout the entire organization where everyone sees the big picture, they believe in the values, and they live them to the best of their abilities. And then, you know, if you walk into any one of our restaurants, everybody's unique in themselves, but they all have this attachment to this understanding of what we are as a group. And then you can flourish as an individual. And I was like, damn, that's deep. And so, which is essentially where I got the idea for 1 degree, right? So I went to 4 months. You know, they really were into training. They said, you got to leave home. I have these little kids and my wife. You have to go to Providence, Rhode Island, the original Capital Grille, and you have to spend 4 months working your way out of the dish room into the manager position. So they had this competency-based training, which was unbelievably cool. And they said, just shut up, just work your way out, get humble. And I started in the dish pit as a 40-some-year-old, you know, fairly experienced chef and restaurateur, and worked my way out. And it was amazing. And then I went and I opened up this restaurant, and we had the Palm across the street, and the Palm owned the city. The mayor ate there every lunch. All the Poles ate there. It was like the place. It was like the hub of activity, like where everyone went to be seen. So I was across the street from that, and Morton's, and Ruth Chris, and everybody's like, who's this Capital Grille? And by the way, we just had a failure in San Francisco. So they were real cautious. They said, Ed, if you could just do $5 million a year, man, just get it to $5 million. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? They said, don't worry about anything. Don't look at the P&L for about 18 months. And I'm like, what? Because I just got taught from the Houlihan people that the P&L was everything. Don't look at the P&L for 18 months. I want you to do 2 things. Live the values and nurture your team. It's all about the team. And I was like, okay, I'm good with that. And while you're at it, run for mayor. You know, like go out there and just really, you know, just be yourself, because they knew I was this gregarious guy. And I was like, okay. And I actually took them by their word. Like,
I thought you were saying I actually ran for mayor. I was like,
no. Actually, well, I got to know the mayor really well, but that's another story.
But to the word.
So I just, that was me in AA and everything I did. Like, if you told me what to do and I bought in, I'm all in, right? I'm like, let's go. So, you know, they gave me this beautiful horse, and I was the jockey, and I just rode it. And I remember this one time, you know, I was concerned about something with the bottom line within the first 18 months. Got a call from Gene Lee. What did I tell you? Don't worry about whether you're profitable or not. I'm like, Okay.
So what is the why? Why is that the mentality? What was his approach? What was he thinking? What was the strategy behind that?
Because we were managing partners, right? So we were like these little kind of owners. We had to, by the way, we had to buy our way in. It was a public company at this point. It had just gone public. We had to buy stock to become a managing partner. And they kept that. And we had a 5-year contract we had to live in. And so we had a lot to lose. By the way, they paid me half of the salary that Houlihan was paying me. But there was this bonus program that could make me a lot of money. I didn't even know how it worked. I didn't even care. That's me. And so my wife was upset with me for about 1.5 years until we started making bank. But the bottom line is that all the managing partners were smarter than me. They were the guys doing the math, and they were looking at the bottom line. And they kept saying, if you are pulling back labor, not buying enough glassware, not buying enough silverware, not having the right food, in the walk, and if you're not dry aging enough beef, because we dry aged our own beef, we got to create, even if we're losing, we got to create this feeling, right? It was all about this hospitality feeling. And if you did that, and I think Gene Lee said to me once, that's why the CFO is not running the company, right? Don't let a bean counter run your company. If you want great culture and you want profits eventually.
It was in the early 2000s where I think
this was 2001.
Yeah, where there was like this, I would say from like the mid 80s to the 90s, it was all about the bottom line, right? And then they started to realize, holy crap, you can go too far with this.
Right.
You can go too far with this where the bottom line will stifle culture. And then the leading concepts, the leading brands were like, aha, you need systems, processes, procedures, and the bottom line and P&Ls. However, first comes culture.
Yes.
You need that shit, but it can never replace culture.
Right.
And the smartest operators started realizing, like, it's actually culture first. Culture eats processes for breakfast or whatever the saying is. But you need it. You need both.
Yep.
And they so it was around this time where they started prioritizing culture. And I feel like the rest of the industry was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years behind.
Right.
And that's when like culture became the mainstream and like success.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a great point. This book came out too, right? Good to Great. If you've ever read Good to Great, it was a study of these 11 public
Jim
companies.
Collins?
That's right. Yep. Jim Collins. And it was the opposite. It was counterintuitive. It didn't make sense. What do you mean? They were going to have this humble dude like a Gene Lee, quiet, unassuming, who took total responsibility and gave credit to everybody, but had this incredible business will and had a set of values. And then they get the best people and spent a lot of money on people, and they just get the right people in the right seats in the bus. And then they figured out their hedgehog. What are you passionate about? How can you make money? And what can you be the best at in the marketplace? And you keep those 3 Venn diagrams aligned. And then face the brutal facts every day, but don't give up hope. And it was like, wait a minute, this is the opposite. Then strategy was like way down the road. Everybody was doing strategy back then. It was the Welsh era, right? It was the Jack Welch era. It was just like, people are part of a cog, and it just blew that whole idea up. And these guys were ahead of it. Like Gene Lee was way ahead of that. And so I was this happy idiot, and I mean that with great respect for myself, who was just like, okay, I'll do that, and then all my other managing partners were trying to like game the system. So I went on not only to break every record in the Capital Grille ever had. I got the business up to $16 million a year with 180 seats.
Wait, that single location or the entire
one location?
Wow. So
I blew
cleared
it
that
up.
Wow.
I blew it up. So all my theories and their theories came together. I just was a great jockey on this amazing horse that they gave me. They gave me a lot of support, and they really were into leadership training. They were constantly pulling us out. Let's go down to Atlanta, and they would do this whole leadership thing, and they wanted you to do it with your team. So it was really about leadership training and culture and connection and getting buy-in and all that. And I just blew it up. And so every year in these chains, they have these award ceremonies, right? So we would go to Disney one year, and we go to here or there, and I'd be the guy always walking across the stage like GM of the year, people developer of the year, top grossing, top, bonus structure. I was, and people would come up to me, these other managing partners, and go, psst, hey man, come here. What are you doing? Well, I'm just living our values, and I'm living our culture, and I'm taking care of our people. We're building a great. No, what are you really doing? I was like, no, I'm actually just doing that. Well, what about your bonus? How are you figuring it out? I don't know how my bonus works. I didn't. I've never been good at math. I do. Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't mind getting
I had
into
this
that
nice
eventually.
man named Adam Shapiro, and he explained it to me. He was my bar manager, and he was like, "Do you know how this actually works?" I'm like, "No, but boy, I just got a check for $60,000 for a quarterly
I
check
don't know
for
how
$60,000.
it works, but it works.
So it works if you work it, right?
You keep on going back to just living the core values,
Yes.
and nurturing the team.
Yes.
And you never ran for mayor, but get involved with the community,
Mm-hmm.
right? What were the core values? Do you remember the Capital Grille core values to this day?
I don't. It's terrible. I remember one was we all look good together, we all look bad together. That was my favorite. We all look good together, we all look bad together. And that was to tell the team that there's no front or back in the house. And that if we're going to win, we're going to win together. If we're going to lose together. And it's basically personalities. It's principles over personality. So you had a star chef. Like in a chain, you don't know who the chef is, right? If you go down the street, it's the chef, and the chef leaves, and the restaurant goes out of business.
I found the Capital Grille core values on flashcards.
From when, though? Because
I
they
don't know.
changed.
Just want me to go through them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Number 1, we treat each other with dignity, respect, honesty, integrity.
This is the old ones.
Number 2, we hire great people, set clear expectations, we provide regular feedback, and we celebrate great performances.
It's that. Yeah.
3, we function as a team. We look good together. We look good together. We look bad together. That's one you just said. We are committed to continuous training and development. We act guest first. We do it right, or we fix it fast. The guest wins. Moment of truth. We believe in continuous improvement, in getting, I think that's a typo, getting F better. I think it's supposed to be a G. Getting better day by day and
Shift by shift. Yeah.
We're missing 2. Oh, they're making me sign up to get the last 2. Those bastards. All right, but
Yeah, well, anyway. And that's too many, by the way. I'm down to 5 values when I codify when I help my clients codify their value system. I keep it at 5 now. That was 8, and there was too many. But that I ran my company within a company on those. And it's been, I left there in 2006, so it's been a while. And I've written a lot of core values since then and helped a lot of people to try to create this codification so that people can work in harmony. But that was it. And it was just funny, I was just that guy. And it was amazing. And it changed my life financially because, I went from, a chef making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, which was pretty good back then. And then I got into the 6 figures, with hula hands, and that was amazing. I took a half pay cut to go to the Capital Grille because I saw something. Had to tell my wife that we were going to be poor for a year. They even sent us to Disney World because they were trying to keep my head in the game. They're like, well, I'll send you to Disney World. They had free tickets, so it didn't really cost them anything. Meanwhile, we couldn't pay rent, but it was okay. And then I started making unbelievable money beyond my dreams. And
you saw something. What was it that you saw?
What did I see there?
You said you saw something. You took a half pay cut. Because
I saw the potential in the culture and the people, and it wasn't the bonus. I'm one of those people that I jump out of airplanes without parachutes.
Oh my God, we are so the same person. I literally just said this the other day in the 1000th episode that I am the kind. I just jump in and go, oh shit, then I jump out,
right?
Make some corrections, and I jump back in again. Oh shit, jump out.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
it's been my whole career. Yeah. So after I left there, I just had all these wins. I was winning and winning and winning and winning, and I was just really doing great. I had this beautiful new home and nice cars, and things were great. And then I thought that all these things that were supporting me, like I was in a corporate structure, right? I could pick up the phone and go like, what's the square root of accounting, and somebody was be there for me. And so I was kind of lured by my ego into opening a restaurant, a steakhouse down the street from the Capital Grille in this old bank. And it was called Union Trust, also known as Union Bust. And it was an abject failure. So I tasted failure. And
yeah. Wait, so tell me again, how did you transition out of Capital Grille to Union Trust?
5-year contract.
5-year contract. And you were an owner, right? Partner?
Yeah, you buy in, but it's you're still in an employment contract basically. Okay. So I was a full owner at Union Trust.
Before we talk about Union Trust, I am curious because you mentioned something that I think is really interesting, the idea of managing partners. I believe this is the future. I think that as the industry gets more competitive and as we continue to learn from the big guys how to operate, I think that I don't think you can do it alone anymore. The little guy has to act like a big guy. You need that level of excellence.
Right.
And I think the only way you can act like a big guy is if you attract onto yourself, like the point that you made, like you weren't a numbers person, but you need the numbers person. You weren't a chef, but you need a chef. You were the culture, the why guy, the glue, the coach, the leader.
The energy.
Yeah. Usually I think this person comes in the form of the front of house maitre, like the maitre d'.
Right, the old maitre d', yeah.
Like Danny Meyer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't do it alone to be competitive in today's world.
Nope.
You need a team. And in today's world, I think the only way you're going to attract onto yourself the team is if you give them stake in the business to get those people.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that this model, and the cup you're drinking out of right now, Uptown Social out of Charleston. I was just in Charleston. These folks, and it's Eat, Play, Have Fun or something like. I can't remember their the mother group, but it's out in New York. I apologize, but their whole thing is they give equity. They let their team, but they don't just give equity. They make their partners buy in, but they promote from within.
That's right.
They say, you're really great at this. We want to have you open a new restaurant.
Right.
Are you interested in becoming a partner?
Yes.
The EBITDA is $1 million, and at one point you need to give us $10,000 or whatever that works out to.
Yeah.
I
had to give 20. Yeah.
So but it's a good way to get into. Is that how they approached it?
Yep. And then you had to give $20,000, and they bought stock, and it was rare hospitality stock, and then they held it for you, and then it grew or it didn't, and they said, if you leave, we keep your $20,000. So listen, what do most chefs do? I'm pissed today, I'm leaving. Most managers, I can go, especially in this day and age, I can just go anywhere and get a job. It locked you in, and this is very important. Not only did it give me a sense of ownership and responsibility, it helped you create this ownership mentality, which is important. But this is what's going on today. That's a problem in our industry. Like, remember those 3 components that Dan Pink talked about: purpose, mastery, and autonomy? No one's getting mastery anymore, man. They just, and I don't want to sound like a baby boomer about this, because I have millennial children and I love their spirit. I think they have it so much more right than we do in many, many ways. But the bottom line is that in this market where you can jump all around and you're not locked in for 5 years and you have to grind it out and you have to get gritty, people aren't learning. They're not getting mastery, and they're not learning how to be gritty. And because of that, they're all looking for purpose and meaning, and they all want autonomy and work-life balance, which, by the way, is the biggest lie ever sold to the workforce. But that's the story. Another story. They're not getting good. They're not getting gritty. They're not learning how to grind it out. And that's an essential part of success. If you want to be amazing, you got to learn fail, you got to learn to grind, you got to learn to get gritty, and you got to get really, really freaking good. And you don't do that by bouncing around. You just don't.
So when you say bouncing around, you're doing a year here, a year there. Yeah. I think it's weird. I think I agree 100% with you, but I think there's an evolution in a career. When you get started, I feel like you want to give yourself perspective, but eventually you have to find a path, right? Something that resonates with you, and you got to stick with it.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong. I had 11 jobs in 10 years once.
Yeah.
Now there was 3 and 2, but I just kept bouncing because I would go in and go, this culture sucks, and I would bounce around. I didn't use the word culture, but so don't get me wrong. I've bounced, but I'm just saying, essentially, no one is really getting into that gritty grind.
Right. It's interesting because I agree, and part of what was going through my mind when you were talking is I feel like we live in a unique world, an unprecedented world, dare I say.
Yes,
right?
the new era workplace.
Yeah, where evolution like the right way to do things, I feel like is constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you agree or disagree with that?
Totally.
When I say that, what goes through your mind?
I just recodified what it means to be a leader, because vulnerability is now at the top of my list, and awareness, self-awareness, awareness of others. And I never used to use those words.
Self-awareness, the peak of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is where PI lives.
Daniel Goleman, are you familiar with his work?
Yeah. The book on culture is amazing.
He wrote the book on emotional intelligence. Literally.
Yes, literally wrote the book. Most recently
too.
Yeah, his book on culture is amazing too.
But I guess what I'm saying with that is I feel like we live in a technological world where I feel like the I don't know. It's almost like the exponential transformation of the world we're living in, it makes it hard to stay on one path. The idea of having a life career today, like people are changing careers faster than ever because the world is changing. Like if you got into the newspaper industry 30 years ago, like you're not in it anymore.
That's right.
I mean, that's an extreme example, but
that's a good one.
You know what I'm thinking?
Well, I know exactly what you're saying. And this is an economic issue. So starting in the 80s, when they started taking corporations, my father worked for the same company for 48 years. Yeah. He came out of World War II. And he went into this chemical company, and he was a steno. And then they threw him out in the street, and he became a salesman. He became one of the top salespeople in this big company called American Cyanamid, which doesn't exist anymore. But what happened is when in the 80s, especially around the crash of 87, the whole contract with employees changed. It used to be like, my dad would get a new car every 2 years because he was a traveling salesman, and everything was taken care of. Literally retired a multimillionaire and never made probably more than like $50,000 or $60,000 a year because of his stock options. They really took care of my dad. And then the contract changed. And when the contract changed in the 80s, when I hear baby boomers say these kids today, they just, they're shiftless, they don't take responsibility, they're not loyal. It's like, what are you giving them to be loyal about? Right. You're giving them nothing. They don't get benefits. They don't get this. They don't get that. Equity, right? So what are you talking about, man? So the contract changed. So the attitude of the worker changed, and it became about them. So we did that. We made that. We created that. And then we're, us boomers are sitting around going like, what's wrong with these kids today? I'm like, that's what they said about us in the 60s, man. Right. So yeah, the contract changed.
Right. I think that was a good little rabbit hole we went into, but I did cut you short because you were getting into the next evolution, union trust stakehouse.
Yes.
So you had this incredible career, but job, right, with Capital Grille. Mm-hmm. What was in your mind where you're walking away from this just before it feels like they're probably scaling at this point? Like, why leave?
Well, there was a whisper that they were going to be bought by this big company called Darden. Oh. And we were Rare Hospitality. We were like that mid-sized company. We were like freaking cool, man, And, the idea of being with Olive Garden and Red Lobster. And then, I had this, again, my ego was kind of getting the best of me because, it became the top grossing restaurant in Philadelphia. Budokan and us, we would kind of, Steven Starr's Budokan, we'd kind of share that space a little bit, but
Ned Grace is somebody who's on my radar.
Who is?
Ned Grace is
the
founder of
That's right.
Capital Grille, right?
Yeah,
Did you ever get to work with him?
He was gone when I got there. Yeah, they used to laugh that he was floating around somewhere in Florida in a yacht.
He's still floating around. I can't find him because I've been trying to get him on the show.
He's got to be up there.
I think he is getting up there. I'm running out of time. I got to get him on the show.
Yeah, I think he's way up there. Yeah, and Gene Lee just retired like a couple of months ago.
Hey, if you can make Gene Lee happen, he's still kicking around, right?
Oh yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, man. Well, let's see.
Afterwards.
Yeah, we were friends.
I'm interested. All right, so
yep.
Failures. Failures. I love failures.
Yeah, me too.
We learn the most.
Yeah, that's
failures.
Right.
So take us through it.
Well, there was this gentleman and his partners, and they said, we have this space we want you to see. And they took me into this old jewelry shop. And it wasn't just a jewelry shop. It was a massive old bank. It was built in like 1910 by the same guy who built the Ben Franklin Bridge, if you're familiar. And he was a famous French-born architect. And This building was just spectacular. It had 60-foot ceilings. It was just magnificent. And then for a few decades, it was a family jewelry shop. And it was like not just a jewelry shop. It was like the place where you'd go to, do everything in the world of jewelry in Philadelphia. So it had a great history. It had great bones. And I was like, yeah, man, it's time to really do my own thing, right? Even though I'd been kind of doing my own thing in other people's worlds. A couple things. Number one, I didn't vet my partners. And our values were not aligned at all. And shame on me, but I did that. And there was this other thing that was looming. Meanwhile, I had been a restaurant consultant for about 2 years. I opened up this really cool place called the Waterworks restaurant in the old Waterworks behind the art museum. I'd done several other projects. And then when I started Union Trust, which was the name of the bank, by the way, the original bank, I was not, the detail orientation did not kick in, obviously. And I didn't really vet my partners. And this other thing was looming. It was called 2008. So we built the most spectacular, gorgeous restaurant. We were way in over budget. We just kept plowing ahead. I knew that I could build the sales and that we would be fine in about 2 years. We got private money coming in. We were just blowing and going, man. We were just like, it's gonna just happen. And then one day, just before the crash, the bank who was about to give us millions of dollars was bought out. And they came to us and said, hate to tell you guys, but we don't lend to restaurants. And by the way, the economy's kind of shaky right now. And we were like, what? And then that millions that we needed to get to the finish line after we did the equity raise vanished. And then we were hobbled. We got open. I built, to this day, I mean, my wife reminds me daily, like, remember the team you built at Union Trust? I was like, yeah, man, it was the best of the best. We were magnificent. Stole some people from the Capital Grille, met some new people. It was amazing. And but we every given day we're like, can we buy a 6-pack? Do we have money to pay the meat vendor?
Well, it's kind of funny.
We were hobbled,
and it's also, I think the goes back to the significance of having a lane and staying in it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you built a team. You probably pull financial numbers people, right? You knew you needed that, I'm assuming.
Yep.
But I mean, I feel like it just goes to show that, like, you need to be good at everything.
Yes.
Right. And what you were good at was the culture, the team building. And that's what, you leaned into your lane. And when you can go all in on your lane,
yes,
you can go so much further.
Yeah, and my optimism blinded me. Like, the thing that was my energy and my optimism, we're going to make it happen, it blinded me. And I was it's still there, by the way. It's a catering hall now. If you ever look up pictures of the inside of Union Trust Steakhouse, and it's like, wow.
Is that 1 degree? No, Cespi?
No, Chescofee is my client.
Chescofee.
I helped build that company. Got it. But they're still my clients. I do leadership training there to this day. But yeah, it's now Finley Catering, I think. But and I'm glad it's mostly intact, because it was a just an amazing steakhouse palace. So, and then, we hobbled along for another little while, and it was over.
You can't deny the economy crashing, right? Like that, it was a big part of what was going on there, I'm sure. But was there, if you could identify a failure, if you think if there was another contributing factor, what was it?
Inconsistent leadership, meaning I was the managing partner, per se, owner, and I was supposed to be in charge of the culture, and we hired a chef who was also a partner, and he had not been reformed as an asshole. I'm not going to name names, but this guy was so out of control, so inappropriate with the staff. So everything I was saying...
Give me examples of what inappropriate is.
Well, besides the substance abuse, just fits of rage, physical stuff, and I couldn't control him. I always thought I could control everybody, right? I thought that my magic pixie dust that I could sprinkle on people with values and culture which somehow, but I didn't have an HR department like I did down the street at Capital Grille, where the HR guy would fly up from Atlanta and go, stop that. I have a contract and I will, and it was just, it became about him and his ego and personality. And the whole team was looking at me like, what's going on? That was a big problem. And I was like, never again, man. I'm just not going to have that happen again. Yeah.
So, Union Trust Steakhouse closes 2008, 2009?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
You, again, in this idea of tipping points and evolution, what was next for you?
Well, I realized that I just didn't want to go on with the restaurant thing anymore, that I wanted to consult. And I was I'll be a restaurant consultant, but I hated consultants.
I was going to say, but you're not a consultant, you're a coach.
Yeah, I hated consultants. Why? They would come in, make a big mess, and leave. And everything would be worse than when they left. Because most consultants, they were a chef or they were a manager or they were something, and they come in and they just do that role, and it's not sustainable. Like it just, they come in and they charge too much money because they're trying to replace an income. I had to replace a pretty big income myself. And they just they make messes, and it's not cohesive. And
here's my take on consultants. They all figured out how to do something really well,
right?
But not all of them. They figured out how to do one approach, but one approach doesn't work for everybody in the industry.
Thank you.
One thing I've learned is that there is no one way to do anything in this industry. So they try to force people into molds. Hey, this is what worked for me. You do this. Yeah. However, that person that you're helping as the consultant might not have your strengths.
Right.
The way you did it might not be the best way for that person.
That's right.
And that's one of the things I've learned. Just trying to get somebody I started today's conversation. I was trying to crack the molds, right?
Right.
And learn. And I think the biggest secret I've learned is that there is no mold.
No.
It's so what's the word? Malleable, or just.
It is. There's human nature, and then there's everything else. If you got to learn how to understand and help people to grow the way they need to grow, et cetera, by understanding that human beings will only do what they want to do. And how do you get them to buy in and feel a part of something and give meaning to everything, where even if they're there for a short period of time, that they believe what you believe to some extent. But yeah, so I just went out and became a consultant. I was charging too much. I had one client.
So was this Doherty Hospitality Group?
Doherty Hospitality, yeah. Got it. Because that was creative, and this so the managing partner after me at the Capital Grille was a guy named Miguel Miranda, and Miguel and I were I basically was his boss when he worked underneath me. I left Capital Grille. He became the managing partner. And then I stole half his staff, right?
Is he in Florida now?
He is, yeah.
Is he an accountant?
He has an accounting platform.
I know Miguel.
Do you?
Yes.
My God.
He's working with a Mexican concept out of there right now, I want to say. Miguel Miranda. Yeah.
Yeah, so Miguel, I was like his tour mentor. So we did not see eye to eye for a while because I was that runaway rebel down the street, which was disrupting his business. He was still the mighty Capital Grille. But one day he left the Capital Grille. He calls me up and says, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh my God, I didn't think we were friends anymore." He's like, "No, I want to see what you're doing." So he came and observed me being a restaurant consultant at this Irish concept in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which, by the way, was in the building of that restaurant that I opened up when I first became that hybrid GM and chef. It was just coincidence. But anyway, he looked at what I did, and Miguel said, "You know what you're doing is stupid, man." And I was like, "How dare you? You want to come work with me? You're telling me I'm stupid?" And he was right. He said, "This isn't sustainable." And he was the one. Then we became 1 Degree. We said, "Remember the 1 Degree connection at Rare Hospitality, where you could go into the store in Alaska and it was just everything was kind of aligned?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, it's my dream." And we started on this path of being coaches and creating sustainable results around someone's vision and then getting managers who believe in that vision, creating a value system that the team can be on their best day. And then, what we called habits. We didn't call them systems. We started studying human nature and realizing that habits take months to form. It's not a 2-week training program is not going to make somebody have mastery. So we started attaching the whole, science of habit building and all that stuff. And then we started building it into the systems. And so the two of us created 1 Degree. And one of our first clients was Chesapeake Events.
I have a photo. I'm going to have to show you this, but I think he's working with Loli's Mexican. Does that sound familiar to you? I don't know. Yeah,
we are now both back at Chesapeake helping coach, but he works remote, so I really don't know what he's doing now.
I think that's
intimately.
A small world. But one thing that you're bringing it back to this idea of 1 Degree again, and you're kind of reminding me, and I don't know, she might actually be like competition with you guys, so I'm sorry if that's the case. I'm bringing her up right now. But Kathleen Wood, are you familiar with Kathleen Wood? But she talks about the one thing. That's her whole ethos is what is the one thing? What is who are you? What is, if I were to distill you down to your purest essence, the elements that are you, what is the one thing? And then you get that clarity on the one thing, and that one thing becomes the leading edge. It drives everything. When I hear of 1 Degree with you guys, I'm thinking about like a radial. Like you have 360 degrees, right? And the goal is to get on one radial, to get everybody going in the same exact direction.
Yeah,
getting as narrow as possible. Is that how you think about it? Is
because
stacking energy?
Yeah, Gallup wrote a book called "It's the Manager," right? So they realized, like, you could talk all you want about all these different theories and what have you, but you have a business strategy, and then you want business results, and in the middle is this character called a manager, and that manager, if he's not aligned and he doesn't buy in, and he's not that type of leader, your business promise is never going to come to fruition. Period. So you got to focus on that between strategy and results is leadership.
Right.
So that is the 1 Degree connection. And then you want that to perpetrate throughout the entire organization. And it comes down to role modeling. It comes down to behavior more as a leader than it does anything else. And I'm not talking about everyone acting the same. I want you to be yourself, but you have to understand how to get people to give you permission to lead. Like one of my favorite quotes is by Eisenhower, who kind of saved the world, right? General Eisenhower he was the head of D-Day during World War II, and then he was one of our presidents. That leadership is the art of getting people to do what you need done because they want to do it. Like that's, if you're going to boil me down to an essence, that is it. How do you get people to do what you want done because they're totally bought in, and what they call engagement these days, right? That they're engaged. The problem with engagement is that 75%, Gallup does these polls, 75% of the population is disengaged. 75% of the people go to work every day and are miserable. How does that create profits? How does that create great brand experiences? It doesn't. So we got to work on this problem of disengagement, and the only way to do that is through culture and leadership.
Yeah. How do you get people to give you permission to lead?
Trust. Period. It's human beings. What we call trust. We have a fight or flight center in our little limbic brains, and people in nanoseconds decide whether they're going to trust you or not. And if they don't trust you, they're going to work for you for your money, or they'll be there or not. They're not going to give you their full, beautiful, magical selves. So you have to be consistent. And that consistency comes down to connecting with people before you direct them. Miguel and I came up with this mechanism, like connect and direct. You got to connect first, not direct. So we would watch managers and one manager would be like everybody's best friend and everybody loved them, but nothing actually got done. And then somebody else was just like that bulldog, right? Like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. You got to balance those two. But you got to connect first.
You're going to make me flip this conversation. I'm going to need some counseling right now.
No problem.
I feel like you could help me because I literally like to say that Restaurant Unstoppable's unique selling proposition is trust.
Yes.
Trust that we use word of mouth, the most trusted form of marketing, and just like who do I talk to next? Like,
it is the glue of human experience.
I'm facing this situation where and the other thing that I do that helps build trust is I don't promote tools or services unless they've been referred to me by somebody on the show. Right. That's another way. Because if I'm not using it, how am I going to be able to vouch for this tool or service? So I'm finding what happens when your core values, your integrity is your biggest strength, but also your biggest weakness, because it gets in the way of you taking opportunity to get the resources you need to grow and scale.
Well, let's go open another unit trust and violate our value system and see how that goes. That's what happened to me. You cannot violate your own value system and think you're going to be successful. You might make money. I don't know how sustainable it would be, but if you're a passion, purpose-driven human being, unless you're kind of a soulless business type, you could be happy in that realm, but it's not the way people are wired. So if you go outside of what you believe and you are a soulful individual, you'll suffer somehow. Maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's financially, but you're not going to be aligned with your higher self.
What happens if you have the best intentions in the world and you gain trust and you say, come with me, and people get on board, and then you leap like you like to do, like I like to do. Leap first, ready, fire, aim.
Right.
And then figure it out. And then you realize that you bit off more than you can chew. And all the people that came with you are being sank with you.
Yeah, it's the risk you take in leadership.
Right.
A lot of people lost money, and I have friends. I mean, we had a family member who stopped talking to me. We didn't recoup the losses, and it was tough. But that's the risk you take. Or you could, I could just still be washing dishes, but I want to do cool shit. So that's risk taking. Right. And if you're risk averse, you're going to struggle. It's an entrepreneurial journey, and that's around building trust in something and then taking a dire risk, and and then never giving up hope. Right.
I don't know if I've ever heard this from anywhere else, but my biggest fear is becoming a con man. Because I think that a lot of people who have good intentions overpromise, overdream, say, come with me, and then it doesn't work out. And what is a con man? It's somebody who preys on the confidence of others. But a leader is kind of a con man because they, in a sense, need the confidence of others.
Well, we're talking about a dream here, right? We're talking about dreams which aren't real. They have no substance, and there's something you envision, and you get people to believe in it, and you all go along, and guess what? It may or may not work out. And so dreaming is an essential, element of everything that we see around us. And a lot of times I say to my wife, sometimes I feel like, I don't use the word con man, but I have unbelievable, imposter syndrome.
Oh man.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir.
But I also, I always feel like everything is so damn good, man, that how can this be real? Like, I don't deserve this. Like, I'm doing really good here. I'm still happy. I'm still happening. I make money.
I host the #1 restaurant business podcast, and I've never owned a restaurant.
Yeah. Right.
You don't think I feel like a con man?
Sure.
You don't feel like I feel like a,
but you have something.
Imposter.
Yeah.
Right?
You have something. And that something is special and unique to you. And but when you think you feel like a con man, that means you have values. It's narcissists you have to worry about. Right. The people who are not self-aware, who...
I also read a book on narcissism too, and I show some traits. I'm not going to lie, man.
Me too.
But I think most leaders do, because they're so...
Sure.
Here's how I feel like I'm a narcissist. I don't do things for me, but I am very selfish when it comes to my mission, my cause.
Me too.
And get the fuck out of my way if you're not going in the same direction.
That's a level 5 leader, by the way.
Right. But that's also a narcissist.
It is, but level 5 leaders give credit and don't take it.
Right.
They take responsibility. When shit goes wrong, it's their fault. When good things happen, they give credit. There's somebody running for president right now again, and I'm not going to get political here, but that is that mechanism where always the victim, never responsible, always right, never wrong. That's not human.
Right.
You know, the whole thing's about being human, right? And making connections. That's why we exist, to connect and to do good things for others. That's the only meaning I can figure out here, that I've come up with in 67 years. And that ain't it.
Right. But I'll be honest, man, like I'm not good right now. Like my stomach is messed up. Like I've been
Really?
going to the doctors for the past like 2 months trying
Wow.
to figure out. And I think what happens is I'm just taking it all in my gut. You know, like I'm taking it all in my gut. I'm like on a smoothie diet right now, and like spinach.
Yeah.
And it's.
What do you think's going on?
I think it's stress, man. I think it's, but I feel like I'm bringing this up now because I feel like there's probably what I'm saying right now. There's probably hundreds of people going to me too. Am I going to fail? Am I making promises I can't keep? What's your advice for me? What's the narrative? Like, how do you overcome that?
It's the Stockdale paradox, which is also part of the Good to Great study. It really is, you know, you're super passionate about this, right?
Yeah.
You believe in this, and this is good. And what are you really doing? You know, what is your why? You know, you're trying to share insight with people in one of the toughest industries on the planet.
Inspire, empower, transform the industry. And I believe this. If we transform the industry, we transform the world.
So do you really believe that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all you need. And the rest is just mess. Like, we're imperfect. We make messes. The entrepreneurial journey is an absolute disaster sometimes. But if you stay true to your values, but what I will say, if you feel, if there's something going on, there's something not aligned, right? Maybe you're compromising something. And the Stockdale paradox is the idea that you face the brutal facts. We got to wake up every morning and say, this is fucked up. And I've got to face the brutal facts about this. But I'm not going to give up hope. Most people don't face the brutal facts. They don't want to work through the hard stuff. And then they just live in hope land. That's how I screwed up at Union Trust. I was like all optimism, and I wouldn't face the facts that the chef was an asshole. I wouldn't face the fact that maybe my partners weren't the best business people. And I was clouded. If you can just wake up every morning and stay true to your value system and your belief and your passions, face the absolute brutal facts and make tough decisions around what you value and what gives you integrity and builds trust for your brand, and you but don't give up. You got something.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that advice. Sorry for flipping
My pleasure.
the script on
You just got a little bit of coaching for free.
Yeah. Well, not just me, but I'm sure that resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Absolutely.
Very much. There's one other stop along your way we haven't touched on, Zaxby's.
Yes, Saxby's.
What is Zaxby's?
Saxby's is a coffee company that doesn't really think it's a coffee company. So Union Trust.
Let's actually use that as a teaser. We're going to take one more quick break.
Sure.
To thank our sponsors.
Thank you.
And then we'll be right back. And we also have to talk about enlightened leadership. I think we've been talking about it, circumnavigating it this entire conversation and where we're going into the future.
Yep.
But we'll take one more quick break. We'll be right back.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now, Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We're back. We got about 13, 14 minutes left together. We got some stuff to cover.
Time flies.
Zaxby's.
Saxby's.
Zaxby's. Thank you very much. There is a Zaxby's.
Yeah, this is with a Z. That's a chicken company.
Zaxby's.
Yeah.
How did you grow here, if at all?
Nick and I met in a time when we had the same partner. I was at Union Trust, and this partner was also his partner, and we were both outside of our value system. And he was being pulled into franchising, which if you want to build a culture, not for nothing, but it's very hard to build culture in franchising with the overlord model. And one day his dad was walking down a hallway in this office where I was giving a speech about values to my team. And he walked by. I will never forget. I saw him walk by, his dad, and then walk back. His dad and him worked together. And he went to Nick and said, you got to talk to this guy, because I think this is what we're missing. And I met with Nick, and I shared with him my philosophies about leadership, and all Nick ever wanted to do is build culture. and build community. That's why he got into the coffee business. He didn't even drink coffee, and he wanted to build community. And the direction these partners were taking him in was just about making money. So he pulled away from them. He broke away, pulled back, wrestled his business back, and then hired me and Miguel to help him codify his culture. So we created Make Life Better, which is the motto, the why of Saxby's. Started out just as a coffee company, tried all different kind of things. Now he's an experiential learning company where he works exclusively now with universities and colleges throughout America, building these experiential learning coffee shops. And people go in and buy coffee, and they do what other people do in coffee shops, but they're run by students who are getting credit and learning firsthand how to have hands-on leadership experiences. So he really lived his why, right? And most recently, I went back in 2016, 17, and we redid his value system because the company had changed since I originally helped him do that. And he's just doing amazing now, and he's a great leader, a great guy.
They're also, I noticed that they're a certified B Corp.
Yep.
And this is something that I think we're going to see more of too going into the future. What is a certified B Corp?
Well, they have purpose. They're a purpose-driven organization, right? So, and they get certain tax, benefits out of that. But it is a not-for-profit.
I go back and forth on this. I feel like that just sounds like conscious capitalism to me.
Mm-hmm.
But like at the same time, why can't capitalism? I think there needs to be like a fundamental shift where we change. We start to collectively, as a society, value something other than maximum profit.
Yes.
And maybe say maximum impact, where the focus becomes on how do we gauge our success? Is it on the amount of profit we make or the amount of lives we change?
Yeah.
And I think when you start looking at it like that, you realize that the more lives you change, the more success comes.
Yes.
But why does it have to be not for profit? Like it's almost like it's in that model they're saying that profit is bad. But profit is good because profit allows you to, profit's your cup overflowing. Profit's having the means to create opportunity for other people.
Yeah, there's still money being made, right?
Right.
So it's not like we're purposely not making profit.
I feel like it's bullshit because why don't we just call it conscious capitalism?
That would be a nice new codification.
Right? Like,
yeah, so let's start a movement, man.
I don't know. It's just like, I don't know. It's like, I don't really know much about the world of.
You're a rebel, I can see.
Me? I like to poke the beast.
Me too.
I challenge. It's challenge. So our core
challenge that status quo.
We have integrity. We are students. We are educators. We are collaborators. We are communicators. We show up. We have fun. Are the restaurant unstoppable core values?
Love it.
We are students. In my mind, is we don't take what we see on the surface. We do challenge.
Yeah, you dig down. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I like that about you.
Thank you very much. We do have to talk about enlightened hospitality.
Yep.
Enlightened leadership. What is that? This is a term you've...
Well, it was called servant leadership, right? And then like any other great thing like culture, servant leadership, it becomes hackneyed and everybody's like, this is like last year's thing. Things become trite, right? So enlightened leadership is just a way of understanding that leadership is counterintuitive. It's not your darker impulses to make people do things just because you want them to. It's by digging into engagement, lowering disengagement, being a great leader. So what does it mean to be a great leader? A great enlightened leader has these several attributes. Number one is they connect. They have the ability to connect with people. That's trust building. And how do you build trust? You build trust by being vulnerable as hell. And like, when I was a chef, I didn't want the team to know that I couldn't do certain things, right? Not only not cook, but no, I could cook, but that I might not be good at this or that or whatever. And the minute that I would break down and say, I need your help to the team, they rallied. They were like, yeah, he's real. So vulnerability is not oversharing or crying with your team or going out drinking with them and throwing up on yourself. It is being authentic. So it's connecting and building trust by being authentic and vulnerable and open, being incredibly self-aware, then get back to that responsibility thing. The biggest mistake most leaders make is that they don't take 100% responsibility. 100%. Oh, it's really his fault. No, it's his fault. Well, it was the market conditions. Oh, it rained. No, asshole. It's you. And until you take that 100% mentality of responsibility, you will never really break through and build the kind of clan or tribe that you really need to do great shit together. That's what I believe.
How do we learn vulnerability? Can we learn self-awareness? Because self-awareness, like we already mentioned earlier,
Yep.
is the peak of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Can emotional intelligence be taught?
Yeah. That's where PI comes in for me.
What's PI?
The predictive index is a talent optimization platform that I stumbled upon about 2 years ago. I was using this one platform. They went out of business. And I always wanted to, if you tell somebody, if you're trying to have a tough conversation, like somebody doesn't have integrity, right? How do you tell somebody they're a liar, right? How do you tell somebody that they're too dominant? How do you tell somebody that they work too fast or too slow? The conversation is going to be tough. The only way to do it is to get them to say, you know what? I see that and recognize that in myself. PI is a 6-minute digital test you take. It's an assessment. It's not a test. And it has these 4 factors. What is your level of extroversion? What is your level of dominance? What is your level of patience and formality? So it starts with the dominance. I have high dominance. I'm an extrovert. I like to move fast and I like to break the rules. That's called a maverick in PI. So I'm a maverick, and other people have high precision, high detail orientation, and are very introverted. They might find me freaking annoying, right? And that's where the human grind happens.
I think I'm a fellow maverick, my friend.
No, you're definitely a maverick. You got that maverick. I can send you the assessment.
Yeah, I'd love it.
So I'm a certified PI person now because it gives me this tool where I can say, what do you think of that? And the person looks at it, goes like, oh my God, that's so me. Great, let's talk about that then. Your dominance is killing the team. You don't approach it that way. But if you get somebody to say, oh, these 4 factors, which they determine are these 4 factors that really matter in the workplace, if you can get somebody to say, yeah, I think I recognize that about myself, you are 10,000 miles down the road.
Self-awareness.
Yeah. And then there's coaching guides in there. There's relationship guides. You can build a team inside of there and get the right people in the bus. It's an extraordinary platform. I'm absolutely in love with it. And I use it as one of several tools, but that's the one for self-awareness.
Did you say they went out of business?
No. The Gabriel Institute was an assessment I used for years and years and years, and they went out of business. No, PI is thriving. They're doing great. Yeah.
I think getting somebody from PI on the show would be really interesting.
I can get you my coach. He's fantastic, Mark. He'll do this a lot more justice, this conversation.
Yeah, I think that would be a really great. What's his last name? I'm making notes.
Renke.
Yeah.
Reinke. He is the man.
REI.
Reinke. Yeah, and he's a captain, by the way. Captains are like mavericks.
So before we wrap, we got to wrap up because you have a call in a little bit. Mm-hmm. One thing I do like to talk about before we say goodbye is where are we headed? How do we go into the future intentionally and not? I think the industry has been very reactive for a long time. We react to the consumer.
Right.
I think we need to stop reacting to the consumer. We reacted ourselves into a corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the best thing you can do is build a great culture that when people come in, it's the experience economy, right? I had the opportunity to meet Joe Pine, who wrote The Experience Economy, and we're still in the experience economy. So if you go into a Steven Starr restaurant, I know you talked about Steven Starr in one of the podcasts I listened to, he creates experiences, and the food is great, everything's great, but it's an experience. You go in there and you're taken away. Human beings are the ambiance in restaurants, right? It's that vibe that you feel. So no matter what we're doing, no matter what the food trends are, we're going into mocktail time now, a lot of mocktails. You got to still be able to create a hospitality culture. You got to be able to create this feeling that's only can be created by human beings, and an occasional robot. No, I'm kidding. And so
are you?
No, we have to get ahead of the values that change generationally. I talked about this just 5 years ago, and then COVID happened, boom, and then everybody had an existential crisis, and then they all went, why are we doing this business? And it all blew up. every generation has a different set of values. And if you don't get what's coming down the road, like the millennials are now, in 2020, the millennials took over. Yeah. You don't understand what Gen Z wants. And it can't be like us boomers, like, if your name is on the paycheck, I'll say, we'll do whatever you want. It's over, dudes. Human beings are going to be more and more autonomous. They're going to want more things. You got to be a better trainer. You got to have leadership training. You got to, even if you're a small company, you got to invest in people beyond the money. You got to make it cool. You got to make a place that's like a laboratory, right? And and watch down the street what's coming, man. Yeah. Study these young people and see what's happening, because they're gonna be your problem, or they're going to be your benefit in the future.
Yeah. Chip Connolly, Peak is a great book that kind of touches on what you're talking about.
I'll have to check that out.
It's basically, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He breaks that down. But what he says is exactly what you're saying, is that the base of that hierarchy are your physiological needs, and beyond that is security. And for the longest time, that's where people focus on giving you security.
Yes.
But where we are today is that people want to self-actualize.
Yes.
And that's the peak of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
In your purpose, your why, whatever you want to call it. And that's what drives the new generation.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it's growing, right? Personal growth and being seen, right?
Yeah.
So if you focus on the top of the hierarchy of needs, that's how you attract onto yourself.
My dream is that people like me who help create culture and meaning at work, create value systems, and help bring strategy and people together into business results will be a common thing, right? Stuff that they figured out in these big companies years ago, these Y-based companies that actually do amazing things. The bottom line is like, people still hire me, and it's like, oh, we're going to do this little thing, and then it's going to be, and then he's going to go away. It's like, no, this should be implanted in your business plan. Like,
going back,
that's my dream.
We are in the business of people development.
Yes.
And that has probably been one of the biggest aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about me.
Right.
It's about everyone else.
Yes.
If I make it about everyone else, and where are you going? What do you want? And how can I help you get there? That's the magic sauce.
It is. Yeah.
I've loved this conversation. I do want to, before we wrap up, I do want to get one more nugget out of you, and then we'll get your contact information. We'll have you call somebody out. Autonomy, work-life balance is the biggest lie.
Yes.
Elaborate.
Well, we've been sold this idea of work-life balance, but if you want balance, please, yes. But it's counterbalance. It's not, you cannot get the flywheel going in life. It's physics. And if you're like, work-life balance, you're working 20 hours on and 20 hours off, right? Yeah. I mean, and that's the lie that's been sold to an entire generation. No, you got to work your ass off, get the flywheel moving, and then you could take your and then jump back in. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So I just see a lot of, I don't say young people, even other people who are searching for this balance and then they're like, why aren't I making a lot of money? Why aren't I happier? Why don't I have a nicer car? It's like, because you got to work your ass off. We're still in capitalism.
There's the obstacle is the way mentality of there's what's the word I'm looking for? Solace, freedom in doing the work and getting lost in the work. And
yes, it's not work.
Yeah, and
it's your life.
There's almost it's like a meditative state, and when you're recognized for being good at what you do, that's rewarding.
Yeah,
and that's being seen by your tribe and being recognized and valued by your tribe because you bring value to the community.
And it takes effort, and it goes back to really quickly that Purpose, Mastery, Autonomy from the Drive book, right? By Pink. Like, they're not getting that mastery stuff. They're not getting the flywheel going. They're not getting the momentum. The physics isn't working in their life, and then they're disappointed, and they don't know why.
Ed Doherty, this has been a great conversation.
My pleasure.
Man. Episode 1008. How do we connect with you? If we really enjoyed today's conversation, you are a coach now. That's your profession.
Yes, sir.
We want to work with you. What is the best way to connect?
Well, www.onedegreecoaching.com. On there, you can sign up for Ed's Notes. It's a weekly blog that I do. And that's a great way to get information. I send that out every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. And the more, I would love to get a bunch of people on there because it's always a great conversation. And then I share things like your podcast I shared on my
thank
blog.
You so much.
Yes, I did. With
hopefully
Al
you share
and
this
Greg.
episode too.
I will.
Yeah. And who do you respect and admire in the industry? Somebody who, if I got on the show, you'd be like, I have to listen to that episode.
In people I know, you mean?
Yes.
Well, honestly, the team at Defined, what Al calls that three-headed monster, those three gentlemen, very different. They have this mutual respect and love, and they really deeply care about their team, and they put the team first. So Al and Nick and Greg at Defined, I'm in love with those guys right now.
I had them on the show, right? That's how.
Yeah. And
so I'm getting back on the show.
Yeah, and then my good friend Joe Volpe from Chesapeake Events, I've known now for 15 years. Another great leader. These people they have this core that they keep driving, and they can evolve with what's happening. I just love them.
Again, this is episode 1008. Any tool or service recommended on the show, we'll do our best to link back to it, and we'll have a summary of the discussion over there, as well as how to connect with Ed Doherty. Ed, there is no question, my man. You are unstoppable.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure.